Hi guys, welcome back to the next episode of my NHL deep dive series. Today we're talking about the Vancouver Canucks, but before we do that, I just kind of want to say like I feel awful right now. That's why there hasn't been a video the last couple days. I've just been getting over whatever I have currently. So if this video goes short or I seem like I'm dying, that is why, because I was the last couple days, but I'm starting to feel a little bit better now. So we're back to the videos. Anyway, let's get into the Vancouver Canucks offseason. Kind of an interesting offseason for them. They bring in Jake DeBrusk, Kiefer Sherwood, Dan Tynan, and Daniel Sprong. They lose Elias Lindholm, Eli McKayev, Sam Lafferty, and Vasily Podkolzin. I have this group that's slightly upgraded because I really like Heinen and Sprong and DeBrusk. And the Lindholm loss obviously is a key player for this team, but he also wasn't there for very long, so it's hard for me to like say that it's a huge loss because of that. And then obviously Mikheyev, Lafferty, and Podkolzin are just kind of like depth guys. I think Sherwood, Heinen, and Sprong are better than those three by a decent margin. So they get slightly upgraded in that case, even though I think the Lindholm for DeBrusk swap is a downgrade, probably, but not a huge downgrade, but just enough of a downgrade that uh, it only makes their whole unit slightly upgraded, if that makes sense. Defensively, they bring in Derek Forberg and Desharnais. They lose Zadorov and Ian Cole. I have this group that's slightly downgraded. Nikita Zadorov, who we just talked about in my Bruins deep dive, is somebody that I actually like as kind of a depth defensive defenseman kind of guy. Ian Cole was a good like bottom pair defenseman as well when he was there. Derek Forbert and Desharnais really don't bring in a whole lot of dynamic play to their games. They're just kind of guys. Neither of them I'm very excited about for this blue line. And finally, in net, they lose Casey DeSmith. They don't replace him, so that group is downgraded inherently because they didn't bring anybody else in. So that's kind of what their offseason looked like. Offensively, I really like this team. They're number two for me, and they're number two for a big reason, and that's because of this big three: Pettersson, Miller, and Besser. Obviously, Elias Pettersson, one of the best centers in the NHL, very underrated player. He's somebody that I've liked for a very long time, and he's super dynamic. He doesn't get a lot of love, and I think a lot of that's because people just don't watch the Canucks a whole lot. He didn't have a great playoffs either. But in the regular season, like he's one of the best centers in the NHL for sure. And I think he's just going to be taking another step this year. I expect him to take another step this year anyway. And I think giving him somebody like a Jake DeBrusk is actually like the perfect winger for him if that's what they end up doing. I really like that fit with DeBrusk. DeBrusk kind of fits that style. He can be kind of more of that power forward might not be the right word, but more of that like in the corners kind of battler grinder kind of player. And Pettersson it'll create more space for Pettersson in the middle of the ice, and that'll allow him to be more dynamic in his playmaking. So I expect Elias Pettersson to have another strong season. JT Miller is somebody who I've been kind of hot and cold with for the last couple of years. He has been fairly streaky, but last year he had a phenomenal season, and 2 years ago he had a phenomenal season. So I kind of have to give him the benefit of the doubt of being in that A tier. Like he's been a super dynamic playmaker and offensive threat 2 of the last 3 years, and that's enough for me to put him into that A category for sure. And finally, Brock Besser, I think is a fantastic like third option on this team. He'd be a great first option on a lot of teams. So having him kind of as your third guy is a very good place to be for Vancouver. Again, somebody who can have moments where he looks like a top player in the NHL. He just doesn't have enough of that super high upside compared to guys like Miller and Pettersson. So I had to put him a tier lower. But Brock Besser is still a player that I really like, and this top three is easily one of the best top threes in the NHL. The question is, can they find consistency? I think all three of these guys have had slight consistency issues throughout their time in Vancouver, especially with Miller. So if they can all kind of hit that stride at the same time, like they did last year, yeah, this team's gonna be fine offensively, at least at the top of the roster for sure. Moving on to the second, kind of the secondary unit on this team. Obviously Jake DeBrusk, I just talked about, is somebody that I really like, but it's more Garland, Heinen, and Sprong. These are three guys who I think are all super underrated. And obviously, I mean, I have Heinen and Sprong both at a B minus, and I have Garland at a B. These are guys who are like your perfect kind of middle six guys who can play in most top sixes. But in Vancouver's case, I mean, two of them are going to be playing probably in the bottom six, right? I mean, Sprong and Garland seem like the guys who might get pushed out. I mean, Heinen, two of those three really are going to be down there because I think Hoglander pushes into the top six, and he's somebody else who also could join this kind of group of wingers. And for a while, Vancouver's wingers have been the strength of this team, and I don't see that going away anytime soon. You have all three of those guys really are very good two-way players. They can both play. I mean, Sprong has had defensive issues, so I guess two of them, Heinen and Garland, are more kind of your two-way players. But Daniel Sprong has shown flashes of a very, very high offensive upside. And if you give him the right situation, and I think that situation could be playing with somebody like Elias Pettersson. I think Pettersson, DeBrusk, and Sprong actually make sense as a line just based on the way those players play. You could see Daniel Sprong really kind of hit that like a higher ceiling than what he did in Seattle a couple years ago. And if that happens, like the secondary scorer in this team is going to go crazy. So for the money that they paid him, it's really a no risk, really high reward bet for Vancouver. As for the rest of the depth, I mean, Dakota Joshua, Teddy Bluger, Pius Suter, and Kiefer Sherwood are all guys who I think are very good bottom six forwards. And this is one of the few teams that doesn't have anybody in the D's, and they really only have one C minus, and that's Kiefer Sherwood. So even depth wise, this team is super deep, and that's one of the strengths of this team. There really isn't a lot of holes on this roster. They have the top end talent with guys like Pettersson and Miller who are going to score a bunch of goals, be your offensive guys. You know, you have kind of your two-way guys in a a Heinen, in a Connor Garland, in a Jake DeBrusk. And you have your secondary, like kind of your tertiary scorers, even the guys like Bluger and Suter and Dakota Joshua, who can be good role players. Kiefer Sherwood's got a lot of experience. He can be a good role player for you. And I mean, if Kiefer Sherwood's your 12th best forward, I think you're looking pretty good, especially for a team that's really going to be trying to compete again for a playoff spot and for a Stanley Cup. And obviously, people have made a lot of talk about this team's on ice shooting percentage last year, which was number one in the league. Do I think they're number one in the league again next year or this year coming up? Probably not. But I think this offense is still very much good enough to propel this team into that playoff contention. And it's the rest of the roster that I have big concerns about. Offensively, obviously, this team's one of the best in the NHL. Moving into the blue line for this team, this is a unit that scares me. They're ranked 21st. They're led by Quinn Hughes, who is another one of my A-plus players. There's really not a whole lot to say about Quinn Hughes that hasn't already been said. He's one of the best offensive defensemen in the NHL. He's one of the best all-around defensemen in the NHL. I think there's an argument, especially after last year, that he might be the best defenseman in hockey right now, and he's really doing it with not a whole lot of supporting cast around him. Philip Roenick was brought in, and I liked the acquisition at the time it happened. I didn't like the timing of it, I guess, but I liked the move itself. I thought he fit the team very well, and obviously he had a really strong season last year. It's one of his best years of his career. The problem for me is the rest of this blue line. Carson Soucy and Tyler Myers as your second pair scares me quite a bit. I like Carson Soucy, but I don't like him as my third best defenseman. Tyler Myers obviously is very much a bottom pair kind of guy, and you have Derek Forbort and Desharnais, who again, like if one of those guys is in your lineup as your sixth defenseman, like if one of Tyler Myers, Derek Forbort, and Desharnais is in here as your sixth defenseman, you're probably feeling okay about your blue line. But there's a lot of questions here. I mean, this team definitely has a type that they want to go for players because all three of those guys very much fit that big defenseman kind of stereotype. Obviously, Tyler Myers doesn't have the physical side that a Forsberg or Desharnais do, but Vancouver definitely has a type that they like for defensemen, and that worries me a little bit. I don't know if I trust this blue line, especially with the goaltending situation. Um, but I think Carson Soucy has enough upside that he's fine. But again, as your third best defenseman, that's a big ask for a guy who really should be like your fifth best defenseman, especially on a contending team, right? Like this isn't a team that's rebuilding. We're not talking about San Jose's blue line anymore. We're talking about a top half of the league team. So that worries me. I mean, the back end here is just it's full of question marks. And if Vancouver is going to have a big target this deadline, and even during the season, I think it's easily trying to bring in one, if not two more defensive players to kind of help this back end and stabilize this back end. I think offensively they have enough defensive good enough defensive forwards that they can kind of survive, but especially based on the goalie situation they're going to be in right now, it's going to be tough. I mean, depending on how long Demko's out for, it's going to be tough. But Quinn Hughes is awesome. There's not really a whole lot to say about him. I think Philip Roanoke had a very strong season last year. I expect him to be similar in play this season. The rest of this blue line is rough, and it's a huge question mark for me, and especially for a team that's trying to compete for a Stanley Cup. It is a massive red flag what this blue line looks like right now. And finally, in net, I mean, the biggest question here, they rank 15th right now, and that's with the asterisks of Thatcher Demko being considered into this. I've seen reports that he might not be back until like January. I don't know how reliable those reports are, but if he's not back and this blue line can't hang on and can't handle the rest of the NHL in a tough Pacific Division too, there could be problems. I mean, obviously, see like they've seen flashes from their back end outside of Demko. I mean, obviously, DeSmith's gone now, but there just hasn't been enough. I mean, like they don't have a safety net here, and this is a team that they've been in on Kevin Lankinen. I wouldn't hate Kevin Lankinen coming in to kind of stabilize this goaltending tandem a little bit, but Thatcher Demko, if he's playing, is fantastic. But I worry about his overall. Like, I mean, even when he comes back, is he going to be fully healthy? Or are they going to have to rush him back because this team's going to be struggling at the start of the year? I don't know. I mean, that's the question. And I mean, Silvas looked very good in the playoffs, but that's a small sample size, right? Like we've seen goalies go crazy in the playoffs and then never do anything again. So that I can't really base anything off that really, aside from him having a good like 3 weeks of hockey. But that's really a huge question mark for this team. And if Demko can come back and be healthy and be good, and this team's kind of hovering around a wild card spot by the time he comes back, then Vancouver should be fine. But if they struggle early and they can't get consistent goaltending and their blue line kind of falls apart, it's going to be a tough sledding for the Canucks this year. Despite how good that offense is. And it's a shame that they might have to waste a very strong year offensively to get them there. And maybe they can outscore a lot of their problems early on, but as the season kind of drags on, that's going to be harder and harder to do, obviously, as teams get better defensively and kind of figure out their system. So yeah, for me, like the Canucks are going to be in that. I think they're closer to being a wild card team this year than they are to winning the Pacific, and that's mostly because of the injury to Demko and the blue line. Offensively, again, like this is one of the best offenses in the NHL, but I need to see proof of concept in the other two units here before I'm able to really give them a strong rating, and that's why they fell pretty significantly from where they ended last season, despite the fact that I don't think their off season moves really hurt them that much, but yeah, let me know what you think of the Canucks down below. And again, sorry, this video is kind of short. I am dying. I'm ready to go drink a bunch of NyQuil and fall asleep. So if you enjoyed this video, leave a like, make sure you subscribe. And we're grinding these out. We got, I don't know, like 2.5 weeks, 3 weeks to get the rest of these out. So uh, we're gonna be pushing. But thank you again for watching, and we will see you in the next one.